Welcome. Again, tell us who you are, why you're running, and all that, and then we can do some Q&A.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for having me. My name is Quentin Palfrey. It's really nice to look around the Zoom and see so many friendly faces. We had an opportunity to say hello also at the Ward 4 party, but it's also nice to see some new faces inspired by Jonathan's leadership and also the recent campaign around the terrific new Mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu, and Ayanna's campaign and so many other things. I met a number of you when I was the 2018 Democratic nominee for Lieutenant Governor, and I'm very grateful for your help. So I'm Quentin Palfrey. I'm planning to run for Attorney General if Maura Healey runs for governor. I had the opportunity to work in the office for a number of years. I was the first chief of the healthcare division at the time when we were implementing Massachusetts' landmark health reform law. So the AG office was one of the key consumer voices in that conversation. We had a particular interest in standing up for vulnerable populations and looking into racial disparities. And we also brought a number of consumer protection cases against some unscrupulous health insurance companies that were exploiting vulnerable people in Massachusetts, and had some really good success in getting recoveries for consumers. I've also had the opportunity to work at the federal level. I had the honor to serve in the White House under President Barack Obama as senior advisor for jobs and competitiveness, and also to serve in the Biden administration, starting on day one as acting general counsel of the Commerce Department. And there I led a team of several hundred lawyers, helped to launch the Build Back Better initiative, and also to disentangle some of the legal mess of the US Census that we had inherited from the Trump administration. And I'll tell you, it's been a tough few years. When I think about what we've inherited from the Trump folks, the first thing that comes to mind is just the cruelty of that administration, trying to rip apart families and put walls between us and our neighbors, trying to knock tens of millions of people off of health insurance. But there's also been this attack on the fundamental underpinnings of our democracy. They don't believe in truth. They don't believe in science. They attack our Constitution. They attack our democracy. And I think we've really struggled with how to deal with these attacks on our American values. And it's been a relief to have sane leadership in the White House and narrow majorities in both houses of the Congress. And we've already made some progress. On day one, President Biden rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement. For as long as we have it in place, the child tax credit has cut child poverty nearly in half. I think this infrastructure bill is going to have a really big impact on jobs, on transportation, on a transition to a clean energy economy. But Washington is broken. And I think we'd be foolish to look to Congress for the solutions to the really big problems we face. Racial injustice, the climate crisis, attacks on our democracy and reproductive rights and workers' rights, gun violence. For the solutions to the really big problems we face, I think we're going to need to look to the states. And Massachusetts has this wonderful tradition of leadership. The Constitution was written here. We were at the heart of the abolitionist movement. We led the way on equal marriage. We led the way on universal access to healthcare. And I think the time has come for Massachusetts to lead again. As a former assistant attorney general, I've seen firsthand how much impact the people's lawyer can have on the issues that matter the most to people on a day-to-day basis. The AG can bring consumer protection cases against predatory lenders, against scammers, against pharmaceutical companies who hurt us, like the Sackler family and the opioid crisis. The AG can bring much needed urgency to the fight for racial justice. On the issue of criminal justice reform, the George Floyd murder and the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict are just the most recent reminders that we have two justice systems in America. And we imprison too many people for too long for doing too little. Race has too much to do with who ends up in the criminal justice system and how they're treated there. The AG can also bring much needed urgency to the fight against the climate crisis. This is the issue that's going to affect the kind of life that our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren live. And yet we've seen at the international level and in Congress how hard it's been to bring urgency to that fight. The AG can lead on those issues. The AG can lead in the fight for workers' rights that are under attack, with wage theft, with these attacks that Uber and Lyft are bringing against workers and misclassification and taking away their benefits. Roe versus Wade is under attack and in the US Supreme Court and in states all across the country, and we need the AG to stand up for reproductive rights, for LGBTQ rights. On the issue that I've spent a lot of my career on, the voter protection and voting rights, our democracy is hanging on by a thread, and we need the states, in particular the AG, to stand up for voting rights across the Commonwealth. So I don't know what's going to happen in the governor's race over the next couple of weeks, but I do think that there's likely to be an open AG seat. If there is, I want to run the kind of campaign that respects and empowers and includes people all across the state. I'd love to have your support at the caucuses next month, at the convention, and in the statewide primary. When I was first thinking of running for office, when I ran for lieutenant governor, it was partially inspired by the horrible events that we saw in Charlottesville. Since then, we've seen children in cages. We've seen collusion between the Oval Office and foreign adversaries. We've seen an armed mob attack to the Congress as they were in the middle of their most sacred duty, trying to ensure a peaceful transition of power. And I think we need to ask ourselves, what are we going to tell our children and our grandchildren that we did in this moment when our American values were so obviously under attack? And I want to be able to say that we stood up and we fought back and we pounded our fists on the table and screamed till we were hoarse, that this isn't the kind of America we want to live in. So I'd love to have your support, and I'd love to join with you to build a grassroots movement from Boston to the Berkshires to take back our democracy and lead on the issues that really affect us every day. I'm Quentin Palfrey. I'd love to have your support, and I'd love to answer some questions if there are any.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And then for folks, for questions, you can either feel free to use the raise your hand function. You can drop your question in the chat and I'll ask it for you, or feel free to unmute and ask your question yourself. I see Ben and or Jane.
So Quentin, I have two questions. One is, how would you work with Rachel Rollins and think about low-level crime as not being as important, although it is important in terms of AG policy? And then the second question, I will, if Jonathan will let me.
So Ben, that's a terrific question. And I think that Rachel Rollins has been an extraordinarily successful DA. And I think that the way that she has rethought prosecutorial discretion as part of this progressive prosecutor movement has been really revolutionary. And I think that one of the things that I've most admired about the work that she's done in trying to remedy some of the really big structural racism in our system and some of the really big disparities that we see is not only being innovative in using prosecutorial discretion, but also incorporating evidence into that process. She's invited scholars in to the process to look at the data in real time and to be able to study what's working and to be able to expand and continue the things that are working, and also to course correct as we learn more about these innovative approaches. And I think that that's the kind of urgency that we need to bring to reform of the criminal justice system. This is a system that's not working well, that has deeply embedded structural disparities to it. And so I think we need to bring that urgency. Now, you mentioned the question how we work together. I think that there are lots of opportunities for the AG to work with the DAs and to be a leader in terms of the criminal justice reform agenda. Now that Rachel is moving over, and we're thrilled that she was confirmed as the U.S. Attorney, I think there are lots of opportunities for the state to work with the federal government hand in hand to try and reform this system that's so badly in need of reform.
Thanks. Jonathan, I'll defer my second question, but would like to come back to it after other people have asked questions.
That works great. So I'll do Ryan, I see your hand up, and then I'll ask Carol's question. So Ryan.
Hi, Quentin. Thanks for joining us. What specifically would you do as AG to improve voting rights in Massachusetts?
It's a great question. I think there's a lot of need right now for us to have more urgency on the fight for voting rights, even here in Massachusetts. As you may know, the legislature passed a piece of legislation during the earlier part of the pandemic that put in place vote by mail. That has expired. And so as of this moment, we actually don't have vote by mail available in Massachusetts. We also don't have election day registration, which is something that has worked really well in 20 states and the District of Columbia. Often what happens when you don't have election day registration is that the people who are barred by this really bureaucratic obstacle are often younger people, people who move around a lot, and communities of color. And so I think we need to reform that. I think we need early voting for all elections. And so there are a number of legislative reforms that I hope that Beacon Hill will take up even before the new term starts for a new AG. We also need to push on the federal level. This week, President Biden and Vice President Harris called for a reform to the filibuster. I know that Senate Majority Leader Schumer is planning to bring that to the floor, but I do think that we're going to have a lot of trouble getting the kind of urgency that we need out of the federal level, particularly with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema likely opposing those reforms. But I think we need to band together. One of the things that the AGs have done really well is multi-state actions and multi-state pressure to have the kind of national leadership that we need. And then there's the enforcement of our own laws here at home to make sure that they are enforced in a way that increases access to voting and lets people register, vote, and have their votes count. So I think there's a lot of work to do here.
I'll ask Carol's question from the chat, which was, can you bring us up to date on the Sackler opioid settlement status? And are there any unmet opportunities for our next Attorney General?
So I think we're going to have to see where that goes, and I don't want to get into specific cases, but I think the broad sweep of this is that this has been an abuse, a shocking set of abuses by these pharmaceutical companies. It's reminiscent to me of some of how the cigarette manufacturers for many years lied and manipulated us, and the public health consequences in both cases have just been devastating. I think it's a really good example of a way that the multi-state AG investigations can work to solve some of these bigger problems. But I do want to see real accountability for the Sackler family and real recoveries for people who have been harmed. This is an issue that has really devastated families and communities all across the Commonwealth and all across the country. I think every one of us has been affected directly by this epidemic. And I do think that the companies bear a lot of responsibility for that and should be held to account.
Then I'll go Don Steinberg, John Buxton, and then Ben, if you want to ask your second question. And I think that will probably, I'll go do those in order, and then it's probably going to be time after those for the next speaker. But Don.
Thanks, Jonathan. Hi, Quentin. It's
Hi,
great
Don.
to meet you.
Nice to see you.
So you mentioned a lot of great things you're hoping to push for, but I think we all know it's sometimes hard to get everything done. And are there two or three of those that you really see as sort of top priorities?
Thanks, Don. Yeah, so I think of the three affirmative priorities that I want to focus on as AG are racial justice, the fight against the climate crisis, and the fight for our democracy. I think that those are three sort of existential threats that we face, where the AG office is well positioned to have a leadership role, and where we need to have strategic priorities where those are focused on throughout the office, where we hold ourselves accountable for accomplishing that mission. That said, it's a very large office. It touches on every aspect of our life here in the Commonwealth. And so I think it's important to have an AG that is also, running an extremely successful law office and can work on the issues that affect people every day. So I think those are the sort of three major overarching strategic priorities. But I think that there are a number of other ways that we can serve the people of the Commonwealth.
Thank you.
John Buxton. You're muted.
Sorry. Quentin, you can just answer yes, yes, and yes. If, make it very quick. You support the licenses for undocumented.
Of course.
Do you support the separation of our police forces in general from the federal ICE?
Oh, of course. Absolutely.
Okay. And the last one is, do you support reformative justice?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question.
Thank you. And then Ben, you wanted to ask your second question.
Yeah, second question, Quentin, has to do with juvenile justice. I don't know if the AG's office is involved with it, but the Citizens for Juvenile Justice have been a very strong organization. And to get teenagers to prevent them from going into the adult justice system, we need really vigorous support of the court clinics. Cambridge is a good model of wraparound services. How do you see this from the perspective of your office?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many opportunities to disrupt the school to prison pipeline. And I think that we need to be creative in thinking about how we address the underlying challenges that cause people to get involved with the criminal justice system. We need more mental health services, substance use services, more housing stability. There's some good evidence on some of the things that work best in order to take folks who are at risk of engagement with the criminal justice system. Two of them in particular, I want to point out where the evidence is particularly strong. One of them is summer jobs programs. Turns out that those work quite well. And we've expanded. When I worked in the Obama administration, there was a program that came out of that's been launched nationally and has a presence here. The other is cognitive behavioral therapy. And it turns out that CBT is actually quite a good tool for helping to address and prevent some of the things that often cause people to get into trouble. So I think we ought to be thinking about dealing with the underlying causes and trying to avoid some of these problems before folks end up in the criminal justice system. And of course, there needs to be more leniency and more opportunities to divert people from the criminal justice system rather than the strict incarceration-based approach.
Great, and I think that's, were there any other questions? So I'll say questions going once, questions going twice. Hearing none. What was that? Was that somebody?
I got one, John.
Okay, yeah.
That was me.
Yeah.
Oh, so Marlene, can I go?
Oh, yeah, if you want to, you can go.
Great.
Yeah, make it quick and give the last question.
So thank you, Quentin, and I appreciate what you were saying about the state of Massachusetts leading the nation in rights. I was very impressed the other day by Rachel Rollins mentioning how she can bring the power she has as U.S. attorney to help local issues like mass cats. And I also feel that by focusing entirely on the state, kind of playing into the hands of the Republicans who really want to dismantle the federal system. So I was wondering if you are aware of this. Well, I'm sure you're aware of it, but in terms of your position in the future, perhaps, or as Attorney General, what you would do to help strengthen the federal system.
So I've had the honor to work in both the state and the federal government. I think each has their roles, and certainly the federal government is one of the places where we can do the most to protect civil rights. And so I'm not suggesting that the state that the federal government abdicate its own responsibility. That said, there's a lot that's broken in Congress, and I think if we sit around waiting for Congress to fix our problems, we're going to be waiting a very long time. You also mentioned mass and caste, and I think that's a really good example of what I was just talking about, where I think we need to be thinking about the underlying problems, the mental health problems, the substance use disorder, the housing instability, and really get at the root problems and try to solve those problems directly. I think a more carceral approach to it, more law enforcement based approach to it is going to take us in a bad directions. I think we should be careful about that.
Thank you.
Okay, so since we do need to get to our next speaker, can I get a round of applause for Quentin? And Quentin, if you can drop in the chat if people have other questions or want to learn more, how they can contact you, website, and all of that. And then I will bring up Danielle Allen.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you again. Danielle, welcome. So introduce yourself, tell us who you are, why you're running, all that jazz. And then we'll do some Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's great to see you and see you in your community. I know we have other occasions to interact as well, but also great to see everybody here tonight. I'm just honored that you are giving me your time. Everybody's plate is so full. I am Danielle Allen, running to be our next governor. I'm sure you know basics already. I'm a nonprofit leader and democracy advocate and teacher. I have traded in my day job as a professor at Harvard to try to answer a call to service. The call comes just from how dark and hard our times are. It's the pandemic, but it's climate crisis and the strain on our democracy and inequality and issues of racial injustice. And I believe nothing could be more important than forging a path out. The place I believe we deserve to get is to a green and healthy next generation democracy. That's what I'm fundamentally working on. The effort to answer the call to service doesn't come out of the blue for me. I have been serving in the nonprofit sector for the last 20 years, and I've been headed towards full embrace of public sector service for the past decade. Really since the point in 2009 when I lost my younger cousin, Michael. Michael and I were super close. We had grown up together. He was probably the first baby I ever held when he was born in 1979. I was a lonely kid that year being bullied on the school playground, and then my aunt delivered a ready-made new best friend. And Michael was a beautiful kid, gorgeous smile, bright mind, full of curiosity. He wanted to travel the world and learn French. And instead of that, in 1995, when he was 15 and I was a couple of years out of college, he was arrested in Southern California on a first arrest for an attempted carjacking. This was a terrible thing to have done. It was also the time in California when punishment was at its most intense. And on that first arrest, Michael got a sentence of 12 years and 8 months. From the age of 15, he served 12 years. And when he got out, I was what I always call cousin on duty. So trying to help put the pieces back together with housing and school and jobs. And I'll never forget sitting with Michael in a hot car on a hot summer's day, weeks after his release, just looking at a map, just trying to figure out how to put the pieces together. The only job that would consider him was in one place, miles away in another direction, the only community college program with a path forward, and miles away in a third direction, the only place with access to affordable housing. Public transportation in between was slow and unreliable. And I sat in that hot car with Michael sitting next to me, new clothes, buttoned down and khakis, because the first thing we did when he got out was buy clothes so we could apply for jobs. I just had this feeling of dread in my bones, the sort of feeling that you have when you're thinking, I do not know how these pieces are going to fit together. And for Michael, in the end, the pieces didn't fit together. He'd had 2 years out, 2 years of freedom, at the point in 2009 when he was shot and killed by somebody he had met while he was in prison. So I know it's a hard story to hear, and I'm sorry, it's a hard story to tell. It was hard for my whole family. It was a life turning point moment for me. I had a deep sense of personal failure about Michael's death, but I also started beating my head against the question, why are we so bad at helping so many young people transition to a healthy adulthood. And if we look around at the opioid epidemic, it's clear it's people of all backgrounds, but especially young men of color. And from that point on, I have been using every tool at my disposal to set the world to rights for young people. Through issue advocacy for cannabis legalization and other aspects of taking apart the war on drugs, through democracy reform as an advocate for ranked choice voting, through civic education reform, and in my day job as well, using the nonprofit leadership roles I've had the opportunity to step into to drive change through education and social justice investment. I led a $60 million division at the University of Chicago. I led the $6 billion Mellon Foundation. During my tenure, we became the largest funder of college for incarcerated people. Here in Massachusetts, I've built a civic education provider from startup. We've got curriculum in a dozen districts in the state. But everything I have ever had the chance to do, to accomplish, has always been because of a team, a big team, a team of courage and compassion, creativity and commitment. And being parts of teams like that has always brought me hope in the darkest times. And this was true in the pandemic as well. When the pandemic hit, I had a huge sense of shock right at the get-go at how different impacts were for different communities. I had a huge sense of shock at how slow people with authority and responsibility were to see that and respond to it. I tried to get the people I had access to do more and move faster, and I couldn't. So I put out a call. And pulled together a big network of experts and practitioners, mayors from around the country, and community advocates. Together, we put together the first national policy roadmap advocating for a real ramp up of public investment in testing. And we did get policy into federal legislation and into Biden-Harris policy. But COVID didn't just teach us that we need more testing. COVID taught us that we live or die by our democracy. And our democracy is broken. But the second thing that COVID taught me during doing that COVID response work is that the transformation that we need is about basic building blocks that really are a state level responsibility. I heard the conversation that just exchanged about federal and state government. But at the end of the day, the building blocks for a healthy community, healthy climate, healthy democracy, those are things like housing. Everybody needs a roof over their head. Transportation, people have got to get to work efficiently and comfortably and in a way that is sustainable based on renewable energy. We've got to have schools we can trust for our kids. We've got to have good jobs, and we need health, justice, and safety for all. Those all have their core authorities at the state level. So we need strategic, energetic leadership in the governor's office to show us the way out of these dark, hard times, to build a big team, again, of courage and commitment, creativity and compassion. Together, we can do this work. I believe we've got to reimagine ourselves as one Commonwealth across our whole state, knit our diverse communities together to build public commitment for hard work on those basic building blocks. And I know Massachusetts has leadership capacity. I won't recite our history to you. You all know it. We have the capacity to show the rest of this country how to turn the tide on Trumpism and lead the way out of the dark to what we deserve. So I am here to ask for your support. It's an honor to be with you. Delighted to have the chance to answer any questions you have for me. Thank you very much again for your time.
Awesome, thank you so much. And so again, Q&A, as with before, feel free to raise your hand, drop a question in the chat, or unmute and ask your question yourself. Sam.
Hey, Danielle, how are you?
Hey, great to see you.
So I have a quick question for you. Obviously, one of the things that they are debating in Congress is the Build Back Better plan, which will be infrastructure. And so if elected governor, what would you do to help refurbish or revitalize the MBTA? Because as we look around from Copley Station to the Red Line to any number of stations, it's literally falling apart.
That is for sure. It is falling apart. And not only that, but when we watch our MBTA teams try to do repairs, we watch them continue to screw things up. I live right here by the Leechmere station, right? The old end of the Green Line. And right now everything is closed down because they're building the new end and they've rearranged the intersection. And we've for months been living with a situation where literally the lights are out of sync, like the red and the green lights at the intersection. So everybody is kind of going at cross purposes. And for me, that just speaks volume about how far we are from where we need to be for planning for the transportation transformation we deserve. There's no question about it. If we are going to hit our goal of a 100% renewable energy economy by 2040, we have got to transition to full electrification of our commuter rail system. We have got to get the MBTA to a higher level of functioning, get people onto public transit, out of cars. For that, we really need strategic capacity in the MBTA. I think the thing that we're missing above all is a single Commonwealth-wide rail division, one Commonwealth rail division. All right, so I actually would be committing to some key organizational restructurings so that MBTA and DOT can put in the capacity for strategic planning that we need. We have a great plan, actually, for electrification of commuter rail that would be coupled with really serious upgrades, addressing deferred maintenance for the MBTA in the rail vision plan that came out in 2020. What we need now is the political will to get it done. That does mean working with federal government, partnering with our congressional delegation to bring those dollars home, but it also means preparing. We should be right now producing shovel-ready projects, preliminary designs done, and the like, putting up the matching funds so that we can bring those federal dollars into this state and deliver the transportation infrastructure that we all deserve. So I hear you, Sam. It's just really a big, big issue, no question about it. So thank you so much for raising it.
And the only other question is, since you were mentioning the federal government, would it be possible, because a lot of people don't know, but ironically, Charlie Baker was the Secretary of Transportation when the big dig happened. And
Yep.
we all know that that was a debacle. They spent a lot of money. But the main thing that also happened after Deval Patrick reorganized the RMV with the MBTA and created the Mass DOT, is that the Massport budget was shifted to the Mass DOT budget. And so that's the reason why the MBTA is always in debt. And so I'm wondering if there's some way that we can reconcile the differences, since the Big Dig was originally a federal project, and use some of the federal funding to basically make the MBTA not only whole, but also reinvested in as a project, because they're also talking about a high-speed rail on the East Coast and on the West Coast that would connect Maine to Florida. And so obviously that would go through Massachusetts. And so we already have a line that goes from Boston to Providence, for example. That's a commuter rail. So that's part of what you're talking about with electrifying the rail. But that might be something to also consider.
I appreciate that. And no, I mean, I think you're exactly right. And that is in, what I was sort of trying to point at. So if we can take electrification of commuter rail, move that over to one Commonwealth Rail Division, so MBTA is not responsible for that. MBTA gets to be responsible for the subway and bus, and then it can do its job. It can have a concentrated focus on that job with the resources that are appropriate to that, not bear the responsibility for the full rail picture, bring in the federal funding to support that. That's how we get a functioning MBTA, I believe.
And then the only last question is, when you look at a municipality like, let's say, Brockton, they have their own bus service, ironically, the BAT bus. And so what could municipalities do like Boston, or let's say, Brookline, that want to free up buses so that there are lines that are free? So for example, Brookline and Cambridge and Boston want to make the 66 a free bus route. But what could we do that might be able to mirror like a Brockton BAT bus with the MBTA buses?
Well, as you know, we have good regional transit authorities all over the Commonwealth, but we haven't actually been coordinating across them or actually investing in them. They're sort of the orphan. And so the Brockton Regional Transit Authority, it's got a lot of good work done, but it has also, not gotten the full attention that it deserves. So I am a supporter of the Fair Share Amendment as a key part of increasing our state budget revenues so that we can invest in both transportation and education. And
they also have GATRA, which is actually in Western Mass. So I don't want to leave them alone.
Yeah,
so when you think about Attleboro and stuff,
15 regional transit authorities, exactly. And lots of great possibilities. Microtransit, there's a beautiful microtransit initiative in Salem, sort of electrification-based rideshare program subsidized by the city using bus routes that really is helping connect older people to medical appointments, helping people get to the grocery store things like that. There's a lot we could do, and honestly, even the strategic work is there. It's not that people haven't been doing it. What we lack is the political will. So that is what I am committing.
Well, thank you very much.
And then there's a question from Lisa Graff in the chat asking about a bill in the legislature, which is H225, an act regarding the use of aversive therapy, that the bill would end the use of aversives at the Judge Rottenberg Center, including pinching, hitting, and high voltage shocks. This bill would ensure that disabled individuals would have the same protections against physical harm that abled individuals currently have.
Thank you so much. I'm embarrassed to say I don't know about this bill, so thank you very much for bringing it to my attention, and I would like to learn more. I am astonished, honestly, to understand that these kinds of techniques are being used. So my instinct would be absolutely to say, let's bring this to an end. So would love to learn more. Have been working really hard actually to understand a lot of the different issues around disability rights. So I'm very grateful to you for bringing this to my attention, and we'll follow up if that's okay, Lisa.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions that folks have?
Yeah, I do.
Jenna.
Okay.
Yes.
And then Ben.
Yes. Well, thank you for your wonderful presentation. I'd appreciate it if you talk a little bit about your campaign.
Sure. So I take it that's a question about the nuts and bolts, basically, of the campaign I've been running. Yeah.
Yeah. And what
so
you're doing presently and what the plans are for the future.
Absolutely. So I started an exploratory process in December of 2020, and I ran a listening tour around the whole Commonwealth. When I, in the middle of my COVID work in the spring and summer of 2020, came to this real sense of clarity about the work that needed to be done at the state level, I reached out to a lot of people to talk about how I could add value in Massachusetts. And I kept hearing back from people, to some extent to my surprise, Danielle, you're articulating a leadership vision. It's the governor's job to set the agenda with a leadership vision. You should run for the job you want to do. And so after I heard that multiple times, I thought, okay, I'll explore this. I'll take it seriously. So in December, I set up an exploratory process, and the point of the listening tour was both to learn and hear. I think it's a moment for transformation, but do the people of Massachusetts feel the same way? I found, yes, there is a huge appetite for transformation. I had to test myself. I'm obviously shifting sectors. That's a dramatic thing to do. Am I any good at it? Do I enjoy it? Yes, I've been loving this experience. I had to build a team. I am very clear that as a first-time candidate, outsider candidate, this works only if I have an A+ team, and I'm very proud of my team. With some of the best folks in Massachusetts, folks from Governor Patrick's campaign, Senator Markey's campaign, as well as some of the best folks nationally. My media consultant is the same as Stacey Abrams' media consultant, as an example. And then I had to test myself from a fundraising point of view. Could we pull the resources together? And by June, we were outraising the others who were in the field in 2021. And so we went ahead and launched and declared. And we did outraise our competitors in the field in 2021, Senators Downing and Ching Diaz. We passed the line of $1 million raised at the end of November. So we put together the resources to run a statewide campaign, and we are running a statewide campaign. And I've been working very hard at the grassroots level. So I've met with more than 100 Democratic town committees at this point, and really enjoying the work of connecting, and as well connecting with all kinds of local chapters of various statewide organizations. So working hard to build a grassroots movement and committed to knitting our diverse communities across the Commonwealth together. We will be a scrappy and insurgent campaign all the way through, but we are committed to the case for one Commonwealth that we carry everywhere we go.
Thank you.
Sure.
And then Ben, and then Kim.
So Danielle, I want to talk about early child development. And I am glad that you came from you did some work at the University of Chicago, because the Nobel Prize winner said if you invest in early education, you get an 8% return on investment. And today,
Jim Heckman, is that who you're talking about?
yes.
Yeah.
And today's Globe had an interesting article. Massachusetts can learn from the Alabama program.
Yep.
We got billions of dollars from the federal government. We have a Common Start coalition.
Yep.
Where do you stand on the priority of early child, affordable, high quality care?
2 thumbs up. Can I put all my digits up in support of that? I'm a supporter of the Common Start Act. I am a supporter, again, of the Fair Share Amendment so that we can fund that universal access to high quality early education, ages 0 to 5. It is the foundation. There's just no question about it. I mean, you've said it beautifully already. For people to have the opportunity for a life of thriving and well-being, early education is the key. And Massachusetts should be leading, not following behind Alabama.
Kim.
Hi, Danielle. So nice to meet you and have you here with us today. And really nice to hear your vision for where we could go. I think the vision thing has been sorely lacking from our current leadership, and that is really great to hear. My question is, that vision is only part of the job of governor. There's the other part of running a multi-billion-dollar organization with tens of thousands of employees, all off doing a bunch of things. And so if you could just talk a little bit about your executive and management experience and how you would tackle that part of the governor's job.
Sure. No, I'm just happy to share. So I was lucky to start relatively young as a leader and manager in the nonprofit sector. I led a $60 million division at the University of Chicago as 250 full-time employees. And in truth, half of the folks in my division were twice my age. And in the leadership cohort, 12 deans all reporting to the president. I was one of 2 women and the only person of color in the mix. I got done the things that my stakeholders sent me to do, and I can talk more about that. But for me, it's always been about team building at every step of the way. It's about the people, the quality of the people that you put on your own immediate team, the quality of the people you put in leadership roles for other parts of the operation. And it's about building a culture, an inclusive, diverse culture of innovation that empowers people to do their best work and to understand themselves as committed to a shared purpose. So I drive that with me everywhere. For example, in the COVID work that my team did, we, in addition to doing the work on testing, we did a lot of work to support healthy and safe in-person learning to try to help people get back to in-person learning sooner rather than later. We did help Cambridge, for example, open earlier than other districts, helped other districts around the country. But come December 2020, folks were still stuck nationally. So we built a national task force to move this forward under the umbrella of something called COVID Collaborative, and got leadership from the NEA and AFT, the teachers unions, to the table, and from the chief state school officers, Council of Chief State School Officers, to the table, and Chiefs for Change, which is the superintendent's network. So all the different conflicting stakeholders, and we worked week after week. But what we did to start was just see if we could get commitment to a shared purpose, and we did. Actually, everybody wanted kids back in schools for in-person learning. So despite the back and forth and fighting, there was that commitment to shared purpose. And because we were able to build those partnerships and establish that shared purpose, we were then able to work in a distributed way to get done the creation of the frameworks that were needed, ultimately distributed through the US Department of Ed, and again, through all the different state departments of education around the country to support reopening. So partly that was about infection prevention control in schools and pooled testing and things like that. But the point of the story I'm trying to tell here is about team building, shared purpose, and empowering people to bring their strengths to the table so that you can do the work together. Sure.
And if you have time for one more quick question, Ryan.
Hi, thanks a lot for joining us. You have, it sounds like, a lot of experience outside of Massachusetts, which I think is a good thing. I think it's exciting. What kind of programs have you seen, whether in other cities or other states,
for 15
do you think are leading that Massachusetts should adopt or look to?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot. I mean, Massachusetts is a leadership state, so let's make no mistake about that, all right? And I skipped over our history previously, but we were, of course, the state that abolished enslavement, and we were the first state to do so before the end of the Revolutionary War. We don't actually stand up and take credit for that as much as we should. And there are reasons, look at the racial wealth gap, and it's, the gap between those two parts of our history is huge. But, first state to invent public education and public health, and much more recently, the first state to legalize marriage equality and lay a foundation for universal access to high quality healthcare. But I do think we haven't been leading under our current governor, and so there is a heck of a lot of, room to make up. So the early education point is a critical one. There are also issues around technology and privacy, where we actually have leadership coming from Maine, of all places, which is a surprising thing. So I think also in climate, we are, not at the back of the pack, but we have a way still to go to get to the head of the pack, and we should be at the head of the pack with our knowledge, resources here, capacity to innovate, and our vulnerability to climate change. We should be absolutely leading. So that would be areas I would prioritize. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, John.
Awesome.
What a terrific questions. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Can I get a round of applause for Danielle? And then if you could drop in the chat if people want to have follow-up questions, if they want to learn more, how they can do so.
Yes, and my colleague Tim, who's on, will put our website information in, and I will share my contact information. And if you have questions for me, please feel free to follow up. I would be very proud and honored to earn your support. And so you can, we'd love to, we're recruiting volunteers and running volunteer trainings and so forth. We'd love to have you. So you can also share your contact info with Tim if that's of interest. Alrighty.
Awesome. Well, thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Jonathan. Thanks to see you.
So yeah, and then I will invite up Adam Hinds, who's running for Lieutenant Governor. Adam, welcome. So tell us who you are, why you're running, all of that, and then we can do some Q&A.
You got it. Thanks for having me. And it's always slightly intimidating to go behind Professor Allen, whose books are on the shelves staring me down. But that was great. So I appreciate kind of all of you taking the time tonight. I was at the holiday party, which is just fantastic. And just the kind of heartwarming engagement that you want to see, not only around the holidays, but after January 6th and kind of seeing our democracy under attack, and to have folks like you coming together on a Tuesday night and making sure that the infrastructure for our democracy is alive and well. So just a quick hat tip for that. So it's true, I'm currently a state senator for 52 municipalities, and I'm running for lieutenant governor because I'm convinced we're at a unique moment in our history, at a time when the pandemic has exposed so many of our weaknesses, to be sure revealing some of our strengths as well, like the ways that we have come together as various communities and the like. But between COVID-19 and our ongoing racial awakening and the economic downturn, they've all revealed so much about what needs to be simply changed. And it's a rare moment when you have people finally paying attention to these issues, and it overlaps with the resources to make progress. We're literally in the process of putting aside billions of dollars for the next administration. And so more of the status quo is simply not what this moment calls for. And to me, if we do not make progress right now on addressing inequity and inequality and disparate outcomes by income, by race, by geography, then we will have failed. It's as simple as that, and it's what got me in the race. And it's going to take visionary leadership to take on these big challenges, and maybe just as importantly, leaders with a record of bringing people together to get things done. And I've spent my career doing that. I'll maybe explain a little bit about that in a minute. But so I want to use that experience to kind of make meaningful change today. So I grew up in a small town in Franklin County in the district I now represent. And I saw in that town firsthand how our shifting economy was impacting families, including my own. My dad left a tool manufacturing company to undertake his own retraining program at the age of 50. He basically went back to school and became a teacher. And so he and I entered middle school at the same time. Him as a teacher, me as a student. My mother was a librarian down the hall in the same high school, which means I didn't get away with much, which is a good thing, I think, in retrospect. But the economic downturn caused by COVID highlighted some of these big flaws throughout our economy and for all to see. The fact that so many are on the verge of economic disaster because of decades of wage stagnation and stifled mobility, high housing costs, childcare costs, as we were hearing and saw in today's Globe. It doesn't matter how hard you work, for how many hours in a day, you can still be close to the edge, and that's just not right. After college, I went to grad school. I went over to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts, joined the Kerry campaign for president to get W out of office, ultimately working for Susan Rice, who later became Barack Obama's national security advisor. As we all know, John Kerry did not win that race. And so I ended up joining the United Nations for nearly 10 years and started in Iraq, whereas ultimately working on disputed territories, and was a team leader in a UN-led negotiation between the Kurdistan region and the rest of the country. moved to Jerusalem for 2 years, where as a regional advisor for the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process. It was right before the Kerry push. So ultimately spent a lot of time on things like Gaza ceasefires more than anything else, but spent a lot of time in regional capitals. And then ended up with Syria, working with Kofi Annan, who is already a former Secretary General at that point, to remove Syria's chemical weapons program and to start the process of trying to get to a ceasefire. In retrospect, neither of which really worked successfully. But then I always wanted to get back to the region, into Massachusetts, and decided and take on the big issues here rather than always overseas. And ended up in Pittsfield, where I am now in Berkshire County, and started a program for high-risk youth and getting involved in violence, really kind of taking on everything from kind of mental health and really overcoming generations of racial inequity and income inequality. And then was pulled to lead a second nonprofit focus a little more on mental health and jobs. So I've kind of taken those experiences with me to the Senate. And right now I'm leading the Senate's effort to reimagine Massachusetts post-pandemic. That's the name of the committee, but I'm not sure when we're going to be post-pandemic. But at base, it's a deliberate effort to put together strategies that address the flaws in our institutions and our investment choices, to overcome generational inequity and prepare us for work of the future. And so to me, I want to make sure that's a role that the Lieutenant Governor's office plays, being essential to rethinking our institutions and making sure we're moving forward in an equitable and strategic manner. Just as one example, I've filed a bill to create an office for racial equity. And my sense is that it's going to require every member of the cabinet, so every secretariat, saying and reporting back, what are you doing this week and this month to roll back, the legacy of redlining or homeownership gaps by race, and then what are you doing in education, and what are you doing in our health system, and on, right? It has to be that deliberate. It has to be that action oriented, with accountability from the top. So I've been in the race since mid-October. It's going well. I jumped in before we knew what Governor Baker was doing, precisely because I feel like we need to be taking drastically different actions in each of these areas. We've rolled out a couple of dozen endorsements, again, across the state, and that has us feeling good. We're where we want to be going into the election year. Maybe I'll just close with this. I became a father about 7.5 months ago. And my wife gave birth, but when you're a new parent, it makes this work, this fight, even more meaningful. For example, we're confronting climate change with the urgency of now, but it's also so that my son Raphael and his generation can merely exist, and we're fighting so that this generation can experience social and racial justice differently. In fact, my son is a part of the migration story. My wife Alicia is Mexican American, and her grandfather came to the U.S., drove trucks his entire life so that his granddaughter could find opportunity. And she's now a college professor and knocks it out of the park every single day. Yet that type of intergenerational mobility is almost unheard of today, according to the data. And that's something that I want to restore, is that sense of opportunity to everyone in Massachusetts. And so I'll just close with that we're in a unique moment. It clearly calls for visionary leadership, actively bringing people together for progress. And I look forward to the opportunity to doing that with you, and getting to know each other along the way. And of course, asking for your support in caucuses and the convention and beyond. So thanks, and maybe I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you so much. And then the floor is now open for questions. And as I noted before, you can use the raise your hand function, you can unmute, or you can put your question in the chat. And I see Ben.
And I agreed to no tough questions beforehand, right, John? Like that was the
Ben and Jane.
It's actually not Ben, it's me. And Adam, you have a wonderful experience and a very compelling vision, but realistically, what can the Lieutenant Governor do? We don't hear anything of the Lieutenant Governor.
Right. So thanks for that question. And it's true. It's a notoriously undefined role. Statutorily and constitutionally, you're overseeing and you're an ex officio member of the Governor's Council, which has a judiciary function, and ultimately play other roles as well in terms of overseeing port authorities or the ports and a few other things with local governments. Maybe I'll start with the local government piece. Since for the last few lieutenant governors, that's certainly been an important function, being a liaison with municipalities and legislators. It's been a good thing that everyone seems to have the lieutenant governor's cell phone, so that when there's red tape to cut, like, that's an important function. I appreciate that, and I would love to continue that. But for me, and I kind of alluded to it in my remarks, I think in ambiguity, there's opportunity. Let's just say that. And it depends on your relationship with the governor. And what's exciting is it looks like the next gubernatorial nominee for the Democratic Party is going to be a woman. And so working with the next governor to implement her vision, but also to really say, look, here are the things that I want to take on. I mentioned the Office of Racial Equity, and we could keep going from there. Climate change, income inequality, and just be a part of how the administration, which ultimately controls a lot of levers through those agencies and offices, to actually see progress in the short term. And so, people have called me, because of that background, someone who can bring people together to solve problems. So I want to say, let's take on the big problems and work as an administration.
Great, thank you so much. Any other questions that folks want to ask?
Oh boy, I was kidding about the easy part, but I guess
I can ask one as well. So as you noted that you chaired the committee in the kind of on the Senate side for the well, it was the post-pandemic, I forget the formal post-pandemic future, post-pandemic resiliency, whatever the formal title of that committee was called. What are your biggest takeaways from the experience of that? I know that the committee had a report a few months ago on some things, but would be curious to see the biggest takeaways and what opportunities that you see in the role of the lieutenant governor, kind of in partnership with the governor, of making some of those reality.
So the name of the committee, it's a new Senate committee, is Reimagining Massachusetts Post-Pandemic Resiliency. And so you're right, we had 5 major findings in that report, and one was the digital divide. As a Western Mass guy, I viewed it with an urban lens, but ultimately, even in Pittsfield, city of 45,000, when we shut down schools at the start of the pandemic, we found that 1,800 households did not have a hard wire into their home. And so what that means for kids working remotely, et cetera, you might have internet with a cell phone, but not necessarily a hard wire. And so that's been a real eye opener, is what do we do about bridging that digital gap in our downtown and urban areas as well. Another big one that kind of really kind of fell through all of our areas of work was the wealth gap. And to me, I feel like this is an opportunity when we can be forward leaning and thinking big. We have the money. I didn't go into details before, but we have $5 billion or so of ARPA money, American Rescue Plan. It looks like we have $3.5 billion left in a budget surplus from FY21. We have $8 billion coming our way for infrastructure. This is significant stuff, and so we can and must use that. That's exactly what I'm talking about when I'm saying this is the moment to move the dial here. And so when we looked at the implications through COVID for, underbanked neighborhoods, for example, was one that jumped out at us. We saw this highlighted as a problem when the PPP loans were not getting to, Black-owned businesses, for example, in certain communities that maybe didn't have as strong a connection with community banks. It jumped out to me and members of the committee that, well, why don't we have a public bank? Why can't we use that to either backstop or to, kind of have different requirements but provide a public purpose and deliberately go into underbanked areas. So that's just one of the many ideas that we've tried to use this moment to think creatively about how we can do policy differently.
Great, and then Jacob Wessel.
Hey there, thanks so much. I have a question about that role of, I guess, the lieutenant governor, but also just more generally about the relationship between state government and local government, thinking about, there have both been the recent, change in housing law so that there's sort of some state preemption about municipalities in the MBTA area need to zone for more multifamily housing, which, you know, in my opinion is great. We have a housing crisis and need to be building more transit-oriented development. But at the same time, Boston struggles, and maybe some other cities do, with having to do like a home rule petition on so many small local changes, from not being able to control its own liquor licenses to a variety of other boards and things that the state and the legislature has to has like control instead of local government. So I'm wondering what you think the role between the legislature and the executive branch, of which you would be a part of, should be, controlling what folks do at the local level, but also recognizing that there is some need for the state to take action when our municipalities aren't stepping up.
Yeah, you put your finger on a big one, which is allowing for local municipalities and local government to make a decision when they want to. And so, for example, let's talk about rent control. It's a bill that was in a hearing last week, and I'm a co-sponsor of the bill, Rep. Connolly, that says municipalities should be able to decide when they want to do that. And so then it gets you past the hurdle of saying, well, wait a second, that's not necessarily applicable in our community, and what about this and that? But you might, at the same time, that you have communities saying, we do have a problem here. And so that's one way to do it. And so that's becoming, I see, a common theme emerging, that you allow for that. And but I think there are other times we're going to hear the HERO Act this Friday for kind of housing and environmental investments coming from a real estate transfer tax increase. And that I feel like we can benefit from, saying, look, the floor at where it is currently at the statewide basis hasn't been updated in decades. And so we can lift that floor, and there are arguments people are making to say, and if you want to go beyond that in your municipality, give us the power to do that as well. And so I think somewhere in there is a formula that seems to work.
Great. And then any other questions that folks have? And again, you can raise your hand, you can unmute, or you can drop your question in the chat.
See a physical hand with Carol.
I have a question. Hi.
Yeah.
So nice that you're here, Adam. Great to meet with you.
Yeah.
If you were Lieutenant Governor today, how would you and the rest of the executive branch address this mess that is going on with was it 700,000 people in this Commonwealth who are being asked to give back their unemployment relief money? How should the governor's office deal with that?
My God, I mean, I think that was, we've received something like, I don't know the total number, but well over $100 billion in federal funds. It's come to businesses, it's gone to individuals, it's gone to our schools, it's gone directly to the state, and on and on. At this moment, when everyone, and all reports that I've seen so far, not that it was any nefarious activity, it was more confusion and uncertainty. And so to me, at this moment, to be clawing back money that's been spent by folks in an economic downturn is not what we should be doing. I've just gone through the several billions of dollars that we have at our hands right now. And if this is, if using some of that to, I guess, follow up on the intention of those funds, that makes sense to me. And so finding a way to get there, and maybe it takes place over years or whatnot. But I think that's the idea that we would start clawing back this money is just, it's a scary step to take at this moment. It doesn't seem right to me.
Great. And any other questions that folks have? And again, if you have questions, you can unmute, you can use the raise your hand question, or you can just drop it in the chat.
And of course, I'll keep my email and whatnot and my phone number in the chat. Everyone can follow up anytime you want.
Awesome. So I'll do like a call for questions 1, call for questions 2. Hearing none, kind of a round of applause for Adam.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you again for joining us. If you know to drop into the chat, people have additional questions. If people want to ask you follow-ups, how they can do so.
Great. Thanks. Great to see everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much.